Cardinal Robert Sarah had always chosen silence over noise, stillness over spectacle. But after the death of Pope Francis, that silence became louder than words. As the Vatican issued its calm and careful statements, and as cardinals around the world paid their public tributes, many waited to hear from the man who had often stood at the other end of the Church's ideological spectrum. Cardinal Sarah, known for his unshakable devotion to traditional Catholic teachings and reverence for sacred liturgy, did not speak, not right away. Days passed, and the absence of his voice became impossible to ignore. This was no ordinary cardinal. This was a man who, to many, represented the enduring soul of a more ancient, more solemn church. To some, he was the guardian of sacred memory. To others, he was a reminder of what the church used to be before the winds of reform swept through. His silence, therefore, was not just an omission, it was a message in itself. When the moment finally came, it did not arrive with a press conference or social media post. It was the middle of the night when 3 letters quietly emerged. They weren't blasted across news outlets or promoted by Vatican spokespeople. Instead, they appeared like whispers, carried gently through the quiet corridors of the internet. One letter was in Latin, the ancient language of the Church, another in French, Cardinal Sarah's mother tongue, and the third in Italian, the language of Rome and the Vatican. Each letter was brief. No paragraph overflowed, no sentence reached for dramatics. Yet each word was placed with the care of a monk copying sacred texts. There was elegance, sorrow, and something more, a tension between reverence and restraint. The letters did not mention Pope Francis by name, they did not praise him explicitly, nor did they criticize him directly. But the absence of both praise and criticism was exactly what struck so many readers. In a time when almost every other cardinal was offering words of gratitude for the late Pope's work, his outreach to the margins, his reform of church governance, his emphasis on mercy, Cardinal Sarah offered only a spiritual reflection, wrapped in poetic language. For those who read with discernment, the message felt like it carried deeper meanings. Was this a simple, quiet farewell? Or was it a gentle correction, a quiet warning? A symbol that not everyone within the Church felt the same about the path it had taken under Francis's leadership. It was not the first time Cardinal Sarah had chosen his words carefully, nor was it the first time his silence spoke louder than others' proclamations. He had long been viewed as a spiritual heavyweight, soft-spoken but with a clarity that pierced through the noise. His past speeches and writings often emphasized the importance of sacred tradition, the liturgy, and the timeless truths of the Catholic faith. He never attacked openly, but his convictions were unwavering. To understand why his message after Pope Francis's death mattered so much, one must look at who Robert Sarah is, not just as a cardinal but as a man. He was not born into privilege. He came from Guinea, West Africa, from a village with no electricity or running water. His parents were simple farmers, faithful and hard-working. Young Robert would walk miles barefoot to attend school. His early life was not marked by comfort, but by sacrifice, contemplation, and prayer. This upbringing shaped him deeply. His silence was not the result of fear or hesitation. It was a cultivated stillness, born from years of reflection and a life formed in solitude and simplicity. When he was only 34 years old, he was appointed bishop by Pope John Paul II, the youngest bishop in the world at the time. That decision was not based on politics or ambition, but on Sarah's spiritual depth and commitment to the faith. Over the years, Cardinal Sarah rose through the ranks of the Vatican. He served as the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. In that role, he emphasized the beauty and sanctity of the Church's traditional liturgy. He urged Catholics to return to reverence in their worship, to rediscover the silence of prayer, and to embrace the mystery of the divine. Not everyone agreed with him. In fact, many within the Church saw him as a critic of the very reforms that Pope Francis championed. Where Francis spoke of a church that goes forth, Cardinal Sarah spoke of a church that must kneel, that must remember, that must not forget its roots. The contrast was not always direct, but it was felt. One looked outward, the other looked upward and inward. So, when Pope Francis died and Cardinal Sarah responded with those midnight letters, quiet, symbolic, carefully measured. The effect was electric. For traditional Catholics, it was a moment of deep emotion. They read his words as a reminder that truth does not change with time. For others, it raised concern. Was he issuing a subtle critique? Was he warning the Church to tread carefully as it moved forward? The letters became a subject of deep analysis among theologians, journalists, and ordinary believers. Every phrase was dissected, every silence was questioned. But perhaps the real power of those letters was not in what they said, but in what they made people feel. A deep, collective awareness that something had ended, and that something else, unknown and possibly unsettling, was beginning. Many Catholics felt a sense of unease, not because of any controversy, but because Cardinal Sarah's message forced them to reflect. In a world full of noise, his stillness became a mirror, and what it reflected was the uncertainty of a church at a crossroads. The death of Pope Francis was not just the end of a papacy. It was the closing of a chapter in the long, complex story of the Church. And Cardinal Sarah, in his own unique way, was marking that ending, not with celebration, not with criticism, but with reverence and warning. His letters were not addressed to any one person. They were not political statements or theological essays. They were meditations, almost like prayers. But beneath the poetry there was an urgency, a call to remember who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. Cardinal Sarah's life and message remind us that faith is not always about speaking. Sometimes it is about listening to the silence, listening to God. And in that silence, we often find the hardest truths, the truth that the Church must always be ready to examine itself, the truth that popularity does not equal faithfulness, the truth that sometimes what is most needed is not reform but return to the sacred, to the silent, to the eternal. As the Church moves forward, the legacy of Pope Francis will be debated and discussed. His vision of a more open, pastoral church touched millions. His outreach to the poor and marginalized earned him admiration. His challenges to tradition were both celebrated and criticized. But now, in this moment after his death, the question is, where does the Church go from here? Cardinal Sarah may not have offered an answer, but he offered a direction, a compass pointing towards silence, prayer, and tradition. He reminded the Church that in times of change it must anchor itself, that in the storms of history it must not lose sight of the lighthouse that is Christ. In the coming months and years, new leaders will rise, a new pope will be chosen, the debates will continue. But Cardinal Sarah's midnight letters will remain, a reminder that beneath all the politics and personalities, the Church's mission is spiritual. It is about the soul, and the soul, unlike the world, does not change quickly. As incense rises in cathedrals and bells toll across ancient cities, one cannot help but feel the weight of this moment. A pope has died, a cardinal has spoken in silence, and the Church stands between memory and mystery, between past and future. Whatever comes next, the faithful will remember those letters, not because they were loud, but because they were true. Not because they answered every question, but because they asked the right ones. And perhaps in the end that is what the Church needs most, not certainty, but courage. The courage to be still, the courage to remember, the courage to remain faithful when the world rushes ahead. Cardinal Sarah gave the Church no easy answers, but he gave it a mirror, a prayer, and a warning. And for those with ears to hear, that may be more powerful than any speech. As the Vatican prepares for its next chapter, and as believers around the world continue to pray and ponder, the legacy of that midnight moment will linger, not as a controversy, but as a call to holiness, to reverence, and to truth. In the quiet, Cardinal Sarah reminded us all, the Church is not merely an institution, it is a mystery, and mysteries are not solved, they are lived.